Just remember at home we love you.
Talk about secret agendas. This one really takes the cake.
We're so proud.
A group of people get together in Rio de Janeiro in 1992,
We're so proud.
call their gathering an Earth Summit, and then proceed to draw up documents designed to reorganize Western civilization.
Victory.
Boy, what a nifty little plan they've come up with. First of all, they want to get the human population reduced down to between 1 and 2 billion from the current 5.6 billion. Then they want to have all of civilization organized around their bioregions, setting aside 50% of the landmass of America and Canada into wilderness areas called reserves, interconnected by corridors and surrounded by buffer zones. And then they want wolves and other carnivores to be given supreme rights of movement, with the ability to run free in all the native areas, where no human use will be allowed. If these people didn't take themselves so seriously, this would be one of the greatest comedies ever written. So join us as my guest, Dr. Michael Kaufman, scientist and author of Saviors of the Earth, and I discuss the Biodiversity Treaty, the Green Globalist Agenda of the UN, and other environmental and socialist organizations and people, including the Clinton administration and the State Department, who are determined to put mankind on the back burner and take over the Earth.
Let the foe get the message loud and clear. In the ones who fight for us, there is no fear.
Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm Terry Kennedy, the host of The Truth as I See It. I'm very excited about this show and the one that will air next week, because I have with me as my guest a man who has been doing 25 years worth of work to prepare him for the work that is ever so important in this hour in the history of America, as far as I'm concerned. And I think I've pretty well summed up my, what the show is going to be about there with my opening statement. So without anything further, Michael, it's good to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Terry.
You're sure welcome. And I hope we can put together a show that can get some, not only some local airing, but some maybe get some good use nationally and internationally, because this actually is an absolutely key element in push coming to shove with what I would call, for lack of a better term right now, those people who are constitutionalists, the patriots of America, etc., as opposed to those who are kind of the New World Order gang who want to take over the earth, the unelected versus the elected Republican form of government.
And that is very true, Terry, and it's an issue that we didn't even realize the total impact behind what is known as the Convention on Biological Diversity that President Bush refused to sign because it left the United States too vulnerable. It was open-ended document, 18 pages long, did not have any implementing language whatsoever in it, basically a motherhood and apple pie document. Even we did not realize the implications of that treaty until just a couple hours before it was to be ratified by the U.S. Senate. And it was only by the grace of God that we got that information and got it to the Senate and introduced irrefutable information on the Senate floor that showed how draconian and how bad this treaty would have been for every single American in this country.
Yeah, that's really amazing, because in the preparatory material that I've read, the UN even refused to, first of all, they refused that the document existed, and then they refused to get it to you, who needed to present it to the Senate so the Senate could ratify it and we could become a party to this treaty.
That's right, and that's what's so disturbing about this whole process is we knew that Article 25 of the treaty, while the treaty itself was only 18 pages long, Article 25 called for a scientific assessment. That, according to the verbiage of the treaty itself, would be used in the developing the implementing language of the treaty. So it was critically important, and it was supposed to be done during the late spring of 1994. And we told the Senate and worked with the Senate to try to get these documents out of the United Nations, because the draft should be done, and we knew that that would really spell out how and which direction this treaty was going to be taken. And on 3 different occasions during the summer, the United Nations basically told the U.S. Senate that this document didn't exist. And we finally, through a series of efforts, got these documents out of the United Nations in Switzerland, of all places, not the United States. Just the day before the treaty was to be ratified on September 29th. And an 18-page treaty, Terry, this is just one of those 12 documents.
Set that on that, I think we're all geared up to be able to shoot that. Shut that there for a moment. And so this is one of 12 documents?
This is one of 12 documents that we got out of the United Nations. The total is over 3,000 pages to explain an 18-page treaty.
Are you serious? Oh.
And it was commissioned by the United Nations Environmental Program. And just these documents are some of the most anti-human documents I have ever seen. We were expecting to be very bad, but even we were shocked at the blatantness of the anti-human message that came out in these documents that would go into framing the actual implementing language of the treaty itself.
Give us a little background right at the front end here, because you're about as credible as anybody to be able to take this issue on right now.
Yes.
Tell us what your background is.
Well, I have a PhD in forest ecosystems analysis and management, and have spent 25 years in ecological classification, management of our ecosystems, forest ecosystems specifically, and was both in academia and then spent 15 years in a paper company, of which half of my time was spent directing a multi-million-dollar research program on global warming and acid rain effects on our forests, and what we as an industry must do to protect our forests from these entities. And what we found was that we were not seeing any effects. And regardless of what the mainstream media has portrayed, the $500 million NAPAP program, the National Acid Precipitation Assessment Program of the U.S. government, which we cooperated with extensively, showed that acid rain was a very small problem. It could be corrected without draconian legislation, and that research was basically ignored in the Congress in creating the Clean Air Act of 1990.
Now, that would have been the 103rd Congress, just before the...
Yes, actually the
kind of
102nd, yes.
Okay.
And what it was is that I just could not believe it, because we're paying as a nation now somewhere between $40 and $60 billion a year for that legislation, and the biggest concern about it is it dramatically increases federal intrusion into local rights that then deny certain citizens and cost this nation megabucks in a variety of different ways that overall cause tremendous problems for this nation.
Yeah. What I see happening is just a sense that I have is that those who would like to take over the world, these are unelected people, they somehow or another figure that they've got a better plan. I don't see God's name anywhere in these documents, so they must figure that there is none, because they're going to have to manage this planet. And I don't want to get spiritual for a moment here, but that's something that pops out at me. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, you're absolutely right. They do have a religious fundamental belief system, and that is at the core of this, and we'll describe this as we get into it. It's the old world belief that nature is God. And now, not every environmental leader, and I want to make it clear that I'm really talking about environmental leadership. I'm not talking about environmentalists. Even people that work for the Sierra Club and Wilderness Society very often do not know what their leadership is doing.
Right, because they have honest concerns about, gosh, we can't do this to the water and the earth and the air.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you talk to these folks that really want to find solutions and so forth, and they're very willing to listen, and we can protect our environment because we do have environmental problems. But because of this belief system that has developed, that nature is truly God, that has led them down a road that is truly astonishing, that's revealed in these documents that we have before us today.
And what I sense also is that the window of opportunity for these people to implement this is becoming very, very narrow, because they see that we as an American republic, which we're not a democracy, we are a republic, are just about ready to take our country back, and it's like they can't allow that to happen, and so they're moving very swiftly. And so with this narrow window, it's very key that this information reach as many people as possible, as quickly as possible.
They fully recognize that we're in a dead heat race right now to inform the American people about this agenda, so that the American people can be educated to make right decisions and correct decisions, because all that they've been getting now for 25 years is, at best, rhetoric, and at worst, out-and-out propaganda and lies that the environment is being destroyed. We have responsibilities for stewardship and so forth of the environment, but much of what's coming out of the environmental community, the leadership, is out-and-out rhetoric, much of which is totally distorted information. And as long as the American people only receive that information, they will give their freedoms away to protect themselves.
Yeah.
If we can show them where the environmental community is incorrect in what they're doing scientifically, and more importantly, where ultimately, through these documents, they want to take us. As you indicated in the introduction, the reduction of the Earth's population from 6 billion people down to 1 billion people in 30 to 40 years. It's going to wake up America to make them realize that, hey, something's seriously wrong with these group of people.
And what I think is important is that you have told me, or at least I've heard from sources, that the DNR and the BLM people are getting turned around. They're coming to you, or they're attending your lectures and meetings and saying, we had no idea this is what this was all about. And also that one of the authors, was it the author of this book right here, or some of this treaty material?
One of the people that actually was involved in writing either this material or the treaty itself was in one of my meetings and was quite antagonistic in that process. And the more I went into the detail of what was actually in these documents, the quieter she became until the end, when I started talking about constitutional issues and why the Founding Fathers developed the Constitution to protect us from government, big government, because they had, as you recall, Terry, and most Americans might remember from their civics classes, we fought a Revolutionary War to break the feudal bondage that the colonies were under. And what is happening with this agenda is they're taking us right back into feudalism that we fought a Revolutionary War to break away from. And when she finally saw that, sitting in the audience, she basically, at the conclusion during the question and answer period, got up and introduced herself as to who she was and who she worked with, and apologized for what she had done.
Wow. Well, that's pretty impressive. I know you've got a lot of transparencies here and some slides, some things you want to show, and we want to focus on the Biodiversity Treaty this show and the Constitution the next show. So I'm just going to let you go ahead and begin to set things up there as you need to.
One of the things that we need to be really concerned about is that the belief system that they have is, in a philosophical respect, getting away from the religious, but the philosophical expression of it is called biocentrism. And that means that basically man, or nature's needs, comes before man's needs. If you understand that nature is God and that therefore must be protected at all costs, because basically if we destroy nature, we destroy all life and us along with it. And therefore, the biocentric viewpoint that is prevalent within environmental leadership and some other environmentalists basically calls for the fact that nature's needs and requirements must be met before mankind's needs are met.
Okay.
And that is a very nihilistic philosophy, because what it results in is the fact that you have a belief system that basically says that whatever law we have, if it benefits mankind at the expense of nature, then that law is bad and must be tightened down to progressively minimize the activities of mankind. And all of this philosophy is expressed in the Convention on Biological Diversity, as we'll see in a moment.
Okay.
The reason why a treaty is so potentially damaging, if you look at Article 6 of our United States Constitution, what you basically find is that the supremacy clause of the Constitution, Article 6, basically makes the treaties the supreme law of the land. Okay. Now, our founding fathers never intended it to be this way, but recent case history in the Supreme Court and others has basically interpreted this to actually be more important than the Constitution itself. So here we have a situation where a treaty is being introduced. We don't even know what the implementing language is going to be,
right,
and it becomes the supreme law of the land. And it's astonishing that they got as far as they did. And it starts out, these 12 sections, this 3,000-page document that we got out of Switzerland just the day before the cloture vote was to be taken on the treaty, cutting off all debate on September 29th. In section 9.2, it basically talks about the fact that this worldview now predominates the conservation movement, the modern conservation movement, the deep ecology movements, the animal rights movement, the United Nations General Assembly itself,
wow,
the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, one of the principal organizations that is behind this, who is the president of which is Jay Hare, who up until July of 1995 was also the president of the National Wildlife Federation. And the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, which is another major international environmental group, and UNCED, which was, in fact, the Earth Summit that we discussed earlier in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. So this worldview is predominating all of these institutions. And what is resulting from that is basically the desire or the command, as revealed in Table 5 of Section 9.2 of the Global Biodiversity Assessment, that human beings, we must change our philosophy, our religion, our economic basis to fit these four principles, where human beings are merely one strand in nature's web.
Okay.
Not a very important one at that.
No, but just one of them.
Just one of them. That all living creatures are considered equal, this biocentric philosophy that we were just talking about before, and that the natural way is right, and that human activity should be molded along nature's rhythms. In other words, we should not do anything that is not natural. And then finally, that nature has an integral set of values, cultural, spiritual, as well as material, and that these must be inscribed into our culture, our religious beliefs, and into our economic fabric, which has tremendous implications then as to how this is translated into our day-to-day activities. In Section 9.2.3, for instance, it talks about the fact that the industrial civilization is not sustainable. It starts first by saying that throughout history, and they're really referring back to the feudal structure of Europe in this case, where all of the wealth and the power was held by the oligarchy or the lords of the manors and so forth. This was okay because the wealth was only controlled by a very few people that had minimal impacts on the environment. But look at here, in contrast, it goes on to say, in the industrial world today, consumerism is all pervasive and in fact defines what constitutes the good life itself.
I see.
So they're basically saying that our standard of living here in America is causing the ecological destruction.
Yeah.
Because we are using too many resources, because we are basically stealing the ecological fabric for our own benefit and destroying the so-called web of life in the process. That's their worldview. They have absolutely no scientific basis upon which to form those conclusions. It's just what they believe in.
It's a belief system.
It's a belief system,
yeah.
That's correct. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that if mankind is destroying the earth because we're too many of us, then they also basically say that our population growth has exceeded the capacity of the Earth's biosphere to maintain it. In other words, we've exceeded sustainable development, as they like to throw around that term. And they give only two solutions to this particular problem, as you alluded to in the introduction. Only two. One is that we must go back to an agricultural world in which 95% plus of us are agrarian peasants.
Oh, I see.
Where they actually say that we should be human peasants with the ruling elite over the top of us. This gets right back to the old feudal structure that predominated from 400 AD to 1939 AD with the Second French Revolution, where Europe was in this feudal system, the medieval ages that were called the Dark Ages because they're so horrible.
Not 1939, but what?
1839. 1839,
okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And if that's the case, you know, if we are willing to become peasants, then we can support between 5 to 7 billion people. That's okay, because we're not impacting the environment that much because we're all starving.
We're working with the environment.
We're working with the environment. Supposedly.
Another ant moving a mountain.
That's correct.
Okay.
And in contrast, if we don't like this particular one, in contrast, they go on to say a reasonable estimate for an industrialized world society having a North American standard of living, we would have to reduce the Earth's population to 1 billion people. And elsewhere in these documents, they talk about a time framework of between 30 to 50 years. Now, they don't give any clue as to how we're going to reduce the Earth's population.
That's my first question. They're going to line us all up and say, well, let's see, you two don't have the qualities that we're going to need, so you get to stay.
No, they don't say that.
No.
But what they do say is verbiage like this, that basically they understand that fertilizers, for instance, have played a very important role in allowing human beings to increase our population without massive starvation. You remember these same environmentalists were basically saying that the Earth was going to suffer tremendous human population starvation by 1970 and 80. It never happened. Why? Because we increased our agricultural ability to feed the world, partially through fertilizers, partially through other types of scientific approaches. This one just being fertilizer. But look what they say here. Basically, they understand that if we cut the use of fertilizers out of agriculture, that the world's food production would be reduced by half. And they go on later on and basically saying that we must reduce the use of fertilizers because of their negative impacts on the ecosystems and on the biodiversity on the face of the earth.
I see.
So there you go. And they didn't say this. This is my interpretation. But you can well imagine, Terry, what would happen if the Earth's the food production was reduced by half. What would happen to the Earth's population? Now it becomes feasible to reduce the Earth's population by 2/3 within 30 to 50 years.
So they planned, starvation would be a good way of getting rid of those.
Starvation and pestilence that always follows it could do the job. Now, they don't say that. That's my interpretation.
Yeah.
The American people very often think the environmentalists, one of the primary objectives of the environmentalists are to create more recreational opportunities. And therefore, they're willing to go along with many of the activities and laws that are being requested by the environmental community to progressively limit man's activity, property rights, and a variety of other things so that they can have more recreational opportunities. But here you can see, and they spend 2 or 3 pages in Section 10 discussing the fact that recreation is one of the fundamental problems in our society, this mass tourism that causes ecological destruction. And must be basically reduced so that we shift towards more sustainable impact and low impact practices. The one that they give, the example that they give, the only example that they give for recreational opportunities is what they call ecotourism.
They're coming up with all these new words. Isn't this interesting? They have to have their own dictionary.
They have to have their own dictionary. And basically, ecotourism is nothing more than going to some sort of natural area, which is basically a wilderness area, standing back and standing in awe of how nature interaction works by itself. Treading lightly, not leaving a footprint on the area, and then going home. And that's what ecotourism is. And that is about the only recommendation that they felt that could be sustainable in this new society that they're trying to develop for us.
And they'll have to decide whether or not they really ought to build a footpath, you know, because that'll ruin things.
That's right.
In the process, gosh, what will we do?
It just snowballs into a variety of other things. When you get down to our basic economic structure, and I'm only hitting the high points in our discussion because our time is limited. I can go on like this for 3 hours. They talk about the fact that our national income accounts, our gross national product and so forth, basically ignores the degradation and the depletion of our natural resources. If I own a timber company or a piece of land and cut timber, for instance, the federal government allows me in the taxes, the IRS allows me to deduct the cost of that timber from my taxes. Why? Because I invested a certain amount to grow those trees. So we are allowed a depletion allowance so that we can write off the costs of growing those trees and so forth.
I see.
Under their particular approach, using green fees and taxes, what they would do is they'd actually charge us for the use of that tree. And the taxes therefore derived would go to what is known as the Global Environmental Facility headquartered in the United Nations. That basically all of these taxes would go to a global government rather than to our national coffers.
Now that government wouldn't be an elected government, it would be an appointed government, wouldn't it?
Basically, it'd be appointed government by the various nations, just like the United Nations is done today.
And this is so different. This is diabolically opposed to
Jefferson and Madison's and Hamilton's vision for the United States as they framed the Constitution. And the whole idea of green fees and taxes, there's tremendous amount of verbiage on converting to consumer taxes, consumption taxes, so that the taxes would be applied to gasoline and air conditioning and so forth and so on to discourage our use of those non-essential
I read
uses.
something where it said that, what was it, on the golf courses or whatever, that air conditioning will be, you know, we'll try and get natural breezes blowing through here and cut down the air conditioning.
That's right. They even talk about the fact that golf courses are terrible. even though they're the only green area besides city parks and so forth within suburbia and urban environments.
Yeah, and they're actually producing oxygen.
They're producing oxygen and providing critical habitat for wildlife.
Yeah. They're
in the middle of the city, and they say that those are no good.
We're going to have to kind of almost draw it to a close. We got less than a couple of minutes, but next week we're going to want to finish up on what we haven't covered here, and then we're going to want to focus on the Constitution, what the Founding Fathers had to say about, in other words, the reason that this country exists today is because this was going on in Europe, and they broke away from this kind of stuff.
That's right. Exactly. And that is really the heart of this message, is that much of the environmental laws and other types of laws that have been passed over the last 25 years is gradually turning us back to a feudal state in which you are ruled by a ruling elite through what is known as vassals in the feudal system, but that would be our federal agencies that then dictate basically at the ground level what we do. And that's the exact reverse model of what our Constitution is supposed to have.
Yeah.
And it's really important that the American people understand why our Constitution was written, because it's there to protect you from a tyrannical government. And what we're beginning to see with the civil unrest across this country, with the rise of the militias and so forth, property rights groups and so forth, is a response to tyranny, federal tyranny, by the definition that our Founding Fathers laid down. We'll discuss that in our next section.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And people can write to you and get more material. They can book you for a lecture tour and whatever. I encourage you folks to get in touch with Dr. Michael Kaufman in Bangor, Maine. God bless you and thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.